One way to take your game to the next level is to learn from the best players. And although there's no Pro Tour yet, so we can't identify pro players, there are certain players that are starting to set themselves apart with their deck construction, play, and tournament results. And one of them is Zach Bivens. So today, we're going to learn a little bit how Zach thinks about the game by deep diving one of his favorite decks and one of the top decks in the current meta, Steel Song. Zach recently piloted this deck to the top of a 45-person 1K tournament at the Mighty Meeple in North Carolina. A lot of this is pure gold. Even if you're not planning on playing this deck or this deck rotates out of the meta, I want you to pay attention to how Zach thinks about rearranging his hand, or how he thinks about adjusting his game plan based on different matchups. Also pay attention to how he thinks about his deck script, the story of his deck and how it's supposed to work. These are all important things to think about as you're building a deck or preparing for a tournament. So let's dive in.
Yeah, so my name's Zach Bivens. Been playing TCGs like literally my entire life. So started Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh in elementary school. So basically like 20 years now. I've been playing trading card games at the highest level, ranked in the top 10 in Pokemon in the world. Started Lorcana literally the day it came out in stores. Yeah, been playing card games my entire life and really just went all in on Lorcana. Really loving it so far.
So, all right. So Zach, you recently participated in a 1K tournament in North Carolina with 45 players, and you took the top prize with this Steel Song deck, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it. First off, for those who don't know, can you describe what a Steel Song deck is?
Sure. So Steel Song, amber and steel colors. You're trying to fill your board with a bunch of singers that you can use to sing powerful songs like A Whole New World, Grab Your Sword, Strength of a Raging Fire, that kind of thing. So you're building your board with a bunch of singers and using those to overwhelm your opponent's board is the main goal.
How would you describe the script for this deck? What's it trying to do?
Yep, this deck, it really depends on the matchup. It can definitely vary. Mostly you're trying to get these big singers out starting on turn one. Cinderella is such an incredibly powerful card. You're trying to fill your board with singers. A lot of times if you have that early Whole New World, you're gonna dump your hand out in the beginning. Like almost every card you're gonna be gone in the ink or on the field by turn 4. You might have a couple left and then you'll sing a Whole New World. So sometimes you can get rid of all your cards and get a fresh 7. Your opponent's probably only played like 3 or 4 cards or something, but you played a ton. So you gain a lot of card advantage that way. But also just even regardless of if you have the Whole New World, you're just building your field with the singers that you can use to abuse it. Because if you think about it, you're using like turn 5, you're using 5 ink, but you're also singing songs for 5. So it's basically like using 10 ink. So you're kind of cheating in a way, like you're cheating out an extra 5 ink. So just getting all these singers is insanely powerful.
So how would you describe this deck's win condition?
Win conditions, you're definitely just getting your singers, trying to overwhelm their board. And then, so in like all the aggro matchups and stuff like that, that's good enough to win. You just get out your singers, take out all their stuff, and eventually you'll quest a 20. In the control matchups, like the dreaded Ruby Amethyst, you're gonna get to a big lore advantage, but you have to use the flutes to finish off the game. Otherwise, they'll just overwhelm you in the end with their powerful top end, removable spells like Be Prepared. So against the control decks, you get a big advantage and then finish off with the flutes. Against the other decks, you just whittle them down and eventually you quest a 20.
What does your ideal first 4 turns look like?
Sure. First 4 turns. Turn 1, you always want to get Cinderella down. It's the only one drop in the entire deck, so pretty much always want to get the Cinderella down. And then on turn 2, it really depends on what matchup you're playing. If you have Robin Hood, I pretty much always play Robin Hood on 2 if he's in my hand, just because he's uninkable. And I'd rather save, if I have a choice between the turn 2 characters and Robin Hood's one of them, you can ink the other ones, so you just keep the other ones for ink, unless you need the Hercules to shift on 4. Or if you're against the Steel Song mirror match and you went second, Prince Eric can help you there. Because when you go second, they're going to have Ariel earlier. So if they sing with Ariel, your Prince Eric can challenge it and take it out. So you almost always just want to go with the Robin Hood if you can. But there are certain situations where you would go with the Hercules or the Eric. Eric, I would say, is the least used one, mainly just for that situation I was talking about, trying to catch up when you're going second in the mirror match. But in general, you just don't really care that much unless you really need a Hercules. You're just happy to see a 2-cost character. And then on turns 3 and 4, you're going to want to get an Ariel and a Gaston down usually. And it can depend on which one you want to play. Like say you have a Gaston and an Ariel in your hand and you have a Whole New World. You really have to consider, do you want to play Gaston first on turn 3 and Ariel on turn 4, or the other way around? So it actually makes a big difference. Like for example, against the Ruby Amethyst deck, If you have the Whole New World already in your hand, you should play Gaston on turn 3 and Ariel on turn 4. And I see a lot of players just rush to playing the Ariel on turn 3, just because it's natural, you're searching for the songs and everything. But if you already have the Whole New World, you should play Gaston on 3 and Ariel on 4, because you're going to be singing Whole New World on turn 4, and you'll have the Gaston exerted and vulnerable. And they're going to want to come in and take it out. So when they take it out with a fox or a snake, Gaston will take them out with them. Whereas Ariel only has 2 strength and wouldn't be able to take out the fox and snake with them. So basically they'll get to kill Ariel for free. So just little things add up, and just depends on the matchup you're playing and everything.
So after you sing the Whole New World, what does the late game look like?
Depends on the matchup, of course, but mostly just picking off your opponent's characters with all your songs. So you're playing out your cards, then you draw into all those songs. So you're trying to wipe their board, use the flutes if you have them down, pick up some lore. The whole game plan is just build your board while taking out your opponents.
So when you draw your initial hand, what are you looking for when you're rearranging?
So like for the mulligan, so I feel like getting the mulligan right for this deck is actually more important than most decks. Because we're playing so many uninkable cards, there's 17 in the deck, so you can really run into problems if you don't do it correctly. Because of all the uninkables, you really have to keep at least 3 to 4 ink in every hand in your first 7. Of course, talking about the mulligan is kind of impossible because it all depends on the 7 that you have, the matchups you have, but in general, the rule would be to keep 3 or more ink. Then against decks like the Tiana deck, like I was telling you about, you have to mulligan really aggressively to get to your Hercules. So you need that 2-cost Hercules, you need that shift Hercules as early as you can get it. So in those matchups, you're being a little more aggressive, a little more reckless with your uninkable cards. You'll mulligan more to try to get to that Hercules. Same thing against the Sapphire Steel. Because of that Fishbone Quill they have on turn 3, you really need to get to Benja. So you're mulligan really hard to get to Benja and to get to your Hercules in that matchup as well. So it can be dependent on the matchups, but in general, 3 or more ink and you're good to go. And then there's even levels to the mulligan. Like say you're against the, Emerald Steel discard deck. Sometimes they play Hercules of their own. So if you know that they don't, for example, if you have prior knowledge and you know that they don't, then you would keep a Grab Your Sword in your hand, because their game plan is going to be to get a Bucky on turn 2, a Prince John on turn 3, and try to discard your hand. But if you have a Grab Your Sword, you can wipe them out and you basically win the game right away there. If you know that they play Hercules, then they're going to mulligan their entire hand to get to Hercules. They'll literally throw all 7 cards away to try to get to that Hercules, because that's their best chance to beat you. So in that case, you don't keep the Grab Your Sword. So yeah, it just depends. There's levels to it. Can change based on the situation.
So the Steel Song deck, most games, you're probably going to play Sleepy's Flute at some point. Is that a card you're keeping in your opening hand typically?
Sleepy's Flute. So I do see a lot of players keep it in their opening hand and play it on turn 2. It kind of makes sense, 2 cost, and it's part of your game plan. But in my opinion, you should be mulliganing all your flutes away. It's uninkable, and you don't want to be playing it in the early game, in my opinion. I'd much rather develop my board and then use the flutes later on if I can. The reason I say you don't play Flute on 2 is because, sure, you can gain lore from the Flute, but you can also gain lore from playing a 2-cost character. So you can gain lore the same way that time, and you can still just play the Flutes later. Whereas playing the 2-cost character later, it might just get removed later on. It's much safer there in the early game to be questing to get that early lore. Whereas Flute's pretty much safe in the late game for the most part. And you just really want to get characters on the board early game so that your songs, like Strength of a Raging Fire, does more damage based on your characters on the field. So you want to get those characters out early and then use the flutes later on. So I just always mulligan in a way and then try to use it later in the game.
Are there any cards that you're keeping 100% of the time?
Ariel, I'm pretty much keeping Ariel 100% of the time, because if you don't have Whole New World, you're trying to get to it. That's your main win condition, really, is Whole New World. In the early turns, you're typically trying to play out all your cards and then Whole New World on turn 4 or so. So you'll pretty much always keep Ariel. You'll keep 2, maybe even 3 Ariels. Cinderella is almost always a keep, just because it's the only 1 cost in your deck and she's such a powerful card. So I'd say Cinderella and Ariel. I'll keep a Whole New World only in certain situations. You don't want to keep it and then draw into another one with your mulligan, because if you draw into, say you draw into a second one or even a third one, that's your main win condition just gone. So the only way that you keep a Whole New World is if you already have the Singer 5, and you can keep a lot of other inkables too, so that you're not mulliganing a bunch of cards and drawing into your second Whole New World. So mainly just Ariel, Cinderella, and maybe a 2-cost character. Otherwise, just throw them back.
What are this deck's good matchups? What are you excited to play against when you sit down?
So definitely any aggro deck is pretty much a free win. Like I said, with Cinderella, starting on turn 1, you already have powerful singers. So if you play against any aggro decks, like the Amethyst Amber decks that used to be floating around a lot, the new Steel Amethyst deck and decks like that, pretty much an easy matchup. And the Emerald Steel discard deck, that's kind of a free matchup as well. Just because they're trying to discard you, but you have Whole New World and draw power like that, so they just can't do it. So anything like that. Ruby Amethyst is kind of a 50-50 matchup. I beat all 3 of them that I played in the 1K tournament, but they were always close games, and it really can come down to who goes first as to who's got the advantage there. Be Prepared is the most dreaded card in the game, I feel. Really tough. Reset the whole board. So that's a really pivotal turn in this deck. If you know you're against a Ruby deck and they have 6 ink on the board, Be Prepared is live now for the rest of the game. So on turn 6, hopefully you've played the early turns where you have enough on board that you don't have to play too much on that turn 6, because committing any more is probably just going to get wiped with that Be Prepared. So the whole time, turns 1 to 6 leading into their turn 7, you're walking this fine line of trying to get enough on the board where you're forcing them to use the Be Prepared. But you're not overcommitting into it so that when they play it, you just lose the game right there. So turn 6, hopefully you have enough characters on board. You can play maybe 1 or 2 small things, but that's really the perfect time to play your flutes, because the flutes aren't affected by the Be Prepared. So that's perfect time to play that. You can draw some cards. A lot of times on turn 5, I'll even just hard pay the 5 ink to play the Whole New World or Grab Your Sword or something, so that I'm not wasting ink putting characters on the field to get blown up by the Be Prepared. So just not overcommitting into that. Forcing them to use it so that they're not able to just play their own characters. You force them to use their ink for that, but you don't overcommit into it where you lose. So it's just walking that fine line all the time. And then the turn after that is really important as well. So the turn after Be Prepared, you're not going to have any characters on the field. If you only play 1 big thing, they'll have Lady Tremaine and just pick off your 1 card. So you have to plan for that turn after Be Prepared as well. So there's a whole nother step to it too that a lot of people don't even realize. So on their turn 7, they played Be Prepared. Now it's your turn. Say you have 7 ink or 8 or however it went. You have to play 2 characters. So it's perfect, like if you can play like a Prince Eric and a Beast. Then when they play the Lady Tremaine, you just sacrifice your Prince Eric and you still have your Beast, and you're gaining advantage with the Beast. Whereas if you didn't set up your hand in a way where you would just only play that Beast out, that Lady Tremaine's going to eat up your Beast, and now they're on the advantage. So you got to go even a step further sometimes and plan for the turn after as well.
What makes that matchup so difficult? What cards do they have that really allow them to take the game?
So Cogsworth is just untouchable. He's a monster. He has Ward, and then he makes all of their other characters have Resist. So my Grab Your Sword doing 2 damage to everything, now it does 1 damage to everything, which is basically nothing. So yeah, just the Resist and Ward on Cogsworth really kills you. And then they have Fishbone Quill, so they get to jump ahead in ink, so they're playing all these big powerful cards faster than you are. So they can get to their Cogsworth on turn 4, for example, because they're accelerating ink. So lots of problem cards there.
You run big Tinkerbell for late game for board control, but you don't run any of the shift targets, the Tiny Tactician. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one that I get a lot. So honestly, you just don't need to shift into Tinkerbell on turn 4. The matchups where you would do it, you're pretty much favored anyways. Small Tinkerbell is just not a good card. She doesn't do a lot on her own, so playing her just to shift, I just don't feel like it's necessary. When you're doing that, you're also giving up that shift target. Like playing a 3-cost character and then you're just getting rid of it completely just to shift. That's a big cost to pay. People don't understand or don't necessarily realize a lot of time that that's a huge cost you're paying. That costs a whole card to do that. So I'd rather like play an Ariel or Gaston and keep that around. I can still sing the same songs because they're Singer 5, so I can still sing the same songs that Tinkerbell would sing by shifting. So I can still deal with their board, I can still sing the Whole New World. I just don't really feel like you need to shift into Tinkerbell that often. And Tinkerbell, and the way I play it, typically I'll play it like on like after I've played a beast. So say I have a beast on the board, he's a 5 cost. I can use him to sing grab your sword, and then I can bring in the Tinkerbell to do that extra damage. So that's 3 damage that I can do all at once. So I'm just trying to combo the Tinkerbell with the grab your sword, and not necessarily bring her out to attack early with. Just because losing that 3 cost character is a really steep cost, and dedicating 3 or 4 deck spaces to it is also a really big cost. So I just don't think it's necessary.
What makes this deck different than other Steel Song decks out there?
Yeah, so other Steel Song decks, Hercules really didn't see any play until just recently. It kind of came up out of necessity. Usually people were running Queen with it and other things, but with the rise in the Tiana aggro decks, the Steel Song decks didn't really have a very good way to deal with that. So Hercules with his 6 strength can get through the Tiana's 4 willpower and her resist 2. So Hercules just came up as a necessity to counter that, as well as giving us a chance against the Sapphire Steel deck, because that's our hardest matchup. And a lot of their removal options just don't work on Hercules because of his resist. So.
What makes Steel Song good?
Steel Song good. I think what makes Steel Song so good is that you truly have a chance against anything. Like I was saying, there's only one bad matchup, the Sapphire Steel, and I've taken games off of that as well with the early Benja and the Hercules. So just the fact that you truly have a chance against everything. Most decks struggle to like Ruby Amethyst, for example, or something like that, but Steel Song gives you the chance to beat everything, and I really like that. And the fact that it's consistent, which goes a long way during a tournament.